this is Annie from Hoop Sisters, and in this video we're going to show you how to do the summer house in the Where Your Heart Is designs. And here's a picture, or actually here's a block of a sample one that I tested out. We're going to make the actual one for the quilt today and chose slightly different fabrics. And for this you're going to need your background fabric. Underneath here you can see there's some wool batting that we're going to be using. That's optional. You don't have to use that. We're going to have our grass fabric, our house fabric, our roof fabric, and our sky background fabric. So let me just pull this off here. I've already done step one, which is to put your battleizer in the hoop. And I have stitched with darker threads so that you can see it. But this is just a placement stitch so you know where to place step two, which is your wool batting. You will be using water-soluble thread instead of a colored thread. And that's just so that there's not all that thickness in the quilt and it will eventually wash out. But step two I'm going to do right now, and that is laying our wool batting that has the prepared pressed edges right into the center of that and let the machine do the zigzag. And with a hot iron you just need to press just the edges, and that'll help keep the presser foot from getting caught while it's attaching it to the battleizer. Here's our completed step two with our battleizer with the wool on top. And as you can see, we've used water-soluble thread. We're going to continue with water-soluble thread for step three, and it's going to sew placement stitches over the wool. If you were to skip the wool, you would just be stitching the placement stitches right onto the battleizer. So here is our wool with placement stitches on it, and that was step three. For step four, you're going to use the fabric that you're going to be using for your grass, and you're going to lay it right side up. You're going to just leave maybe 1/4 of an inch overlapping that first section there, and it should leave approximately 1/2 an inch on each side. And then we're going to continue with the water-soluble thread, and we're going to stitch that to the block. So here's our grass. It's been attached with water-soluble thread. The next part is the body of our house, which is going to be this light brown color. So we're going to place it right side down, raw edges even, and with a neutral thread we're going to stitch a seam. So here's our completed seam. For step six, we're going to flip this fabric right side up. We're going to smooth it out and finger press it, and the sewing machine will sew a tack down stitch. We're going to use neutral thread. Okay, so now we are on step seven. We've completed our tack down stitch. Step seven is the fabric for the roof. So I've chosen this dark charcoal and just lay it on there, and with neutral thread we're going to go ahead and sew the seam. So here is our seam for our roof, and I just wanted to show you, hopefully you can see it. There is a little bit of the house fabric sticking out, which is going to be fine because our roof is a darker fabric. But if the opposite were true and you had a darker house color and a lighter roof, when you flipped it, it may show through. So in that case, if that were the situation, you might want to trim that down a little bit. But we're okay because our fabric on top is darker and it's going to cover the fabric in that seam. So our next step is to flip it right side up, smooth it out, finger press it, and then we will sew the tack down stitch using neutral thread. So there's the tack down stitch for our roof, and now we're going to trim to scant 1/4 inch seams. And I will tell you that in this case, as I mentioned before, my sky fabric is going to be darker than, or lighter than what my roof fabric is. So I made sure that I trimmed a scant 1/4 inch, a little less than 1/4. So our next step would be to sew the background / sky fabric to the block. So we're going to sew a seam here using the neutral thread. Here is our completed step 9. So we're going to flip it up, finger press it, and smooth it out. And step 10, we will be sewing a basting stitch that's going to tack this down. since it's the outside edge of the block, we are going to change our thread and the needle to the water-soluble thread. So here's our tack down for our sky fabric, which I think is step 10, and we're going to trim the corners off here to a scant 1/4 inch. And our next step, which is step 11, we are going to do the corners of the background / sky fabric. So we're going to take our small triangles and we're going to just place them in the corner. It's going to do a seam. Both seams, do one seam and then the other seam all at the same time. So put your neutral thread in your needle and we'll go ahead and stitch these. Alright, so here's our step 11 with our seams. Step 12, we're going to be sewing the tack down stitch to hold the fabric in place. So after you finger press, change to water soluble thread and we'll stitch the tack down. So here's our tack down stitches for our corners. You could trim those off, leaving a 1/2 inch if you want to, or what I'm just going to do is leave them on there and it'll be trimmed when we finally get to the cutting table, and we can trim it when it's time to trim the entire block. Our next step is step 13, and we are going to add placement stitches for our doors and windows. I feel like we're building a real house. Okay, so here's our completed step 13 where we have stitched a placement stitch with water soluble thread. Step 14 is it's going to do a tack down stitch for our door and for both of our windows. So we're just going to lay fabric scraps over the top of it, and with water soluble thread we'll sew the tack down stitches. So here's our step 14 where we have gone ahead and done our tack down of our applique pieces, and since it's applique, I'm going to take my mini hoop scissors and I'm going to trim right up against the basting or the tack down stitch on all these pieces of fabric. And then after we get finished with that, you're going to want to put like a dark gray, dark brown. The thread color choice is entirely up to you. But what it's going to stitch then is, since it's the summer house, is the screen door, the screen's over the window, and also some dirt for the pot for the planters. Our window boxes that'll be under that. It's also going to stitch a planter right there. So take into consideration what color your fabric is as to what color thread you might want to use for those objects. And so let me finish trimming these and then I'll show you what it looks like after we do the next step. So here's our completed screens. Our next step is it's going to stitch the final detail on the screened-in porch or screened door, and also the window frames, the flower boxes, and the flower pot that's going to be in our basket. So I think I'm going to use white thread. Again, the choice is yours depending on the fabric choices that you have for your house. So we leave a little bit of the creativity up to you. So time for our next step, and we're going to be putting in our sidewalk and our chimneys, and I'll use this rust color thread. And this is in the needle only. We're still using embroidery bobbin thread. Alright, we have our brick sidewalk in and our chimneys on. The next step is to do some landscaping. Okay, you can see our greenery is starting to grow, and now just wait, because next step I'm going to show you how to get the blooms to blossom. Well, here's the flowers. Now for the flower centers. So here are the flower centers. Hopefully you can see that. Let me bring it a little closer. And then after that we will be doing the doorknob. So here is the little tiny door handle, just a couple stitches, but it really finishes it nicely. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our backing fabric. So we're going to change to water soluble thread in the needle only. We still have our embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin. We're going to take our backing fabric and center it over the block, and we're going to go ahead and have the machine stitch a basting stitch to attach this to the back of our block. Okay, so we've added our backing fabric. For step 23, we're going to do some detail on the siding section of the house. Okay, so here is our siding that we've added the detail to. The next step is going to be doing the Same thing with the roof. I want to tell you that since this is our first step where we've had our backing fabric added, in order for a prettier looking back, we recommend that you do a needle down, needle up, bring your bobbin thread to the top, and anytime you do that, anytime after you've added your backing fabric. And also what you're going to do in addition to that is from here on out till you're completed your block, you're going to also match your bobbin thread to your needle thread. So let me go ahead and I'll put the other thread in and we'll do the stitching detail for the roof. So here is the detail that we've done to the roof. I matched my fabric to my thread color so it's not as noticeable as maybe the siding on the house, but our final step is we're going to do our quilting that will take place in the sky. Okay, here is our quilting which completes our block. Now the only thing left to do is to take it to the cutting table to do the trimming. So let's step over there so you can see how it's trimmed. Okay, before you take your block out of the hoop, one thing you're going to have to do on each of these blocks, because each side is joined differently and it's all going to depend on where the block is placed in the quilt. Anything that's going to be on the edge of your quilt, such as where this one is positioned on the side of the quilt where there's going to be a border attached to it, you're going to trim it a 1/2 inch through all the layers, a 1/2 inch away from the basting stitch. Over here, where this side here is going to be attached to another block, so we're going to use our trimmer by George 2.0 to trim this. We're going to trim the batting and the backing fabric right up to the basting stitch, and we're going to trim the fabric on the front of the block a 1/4 inch from the basting stitch. So the only thing left is fabric to be able to sew it to the adjoining block. The top and bottom, this is the second row because this is our summer season, so we placed it in the second row. There's going to be some just manually made quilted sashing. That's going to be a break between each of the seasons. And in that case, you're going to use your trimmer by George 2.0, the ruler side, to trim a 1/2 inch, 1.5 inches through all the layers, 1.5 inches from the basting stitch. And the same thing down here on this side, 1.5 inches through all those layers. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So once you have it marked, clearly marked on your battleizer, then you can remove your block from the hoop. So I'm going to get my hoop out of the way. The first thing I believe I will do is I will do this 1/2 inch side, since that's how it's already laying there and I'm right-handed. So I'm going to use my trimmer by George 2.0 and trim a 1/2 inch from the basting stitch. So I have my 1/2 inch mark just laying right on top that basting stitch, and through all the layers I'm going to trim that off. I can use this extra battleizer for the next block, and I'm going to then turn it around this way, and this says trimmer 2.0. So we're going to use the metal edge of our trimmer 2.0 in order to trim this off. So there's our metal edge. We are going to just stick that right underneath the fabric that's on the front of the block, snug it right in there, and then lay it down. And just do a quick peek, make sure there's no fabrics peeking out, and then use a 60mm rotary cutter to cut the battleizer and also the backing fabric away. So then we're going to turn our ruler over, and since we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, we're going to trim our fabric to exactly 1/4 inch from that basting stitch, and that trims the fabric on the front. The only thing left is now the top and bottom, and since these rows, like I said, are going to be sewn to a manually, we're going to do a different sashing join method where you can see the sashing on the front and the back, and in which case the particular width we need and how we're going to do it is we're going to need a 1.5 inch. Now our trimmer by George already has a sashing marking for a different way to join with the sashing showing only on the back. So it just so happens that we're also trimming this 1.5 inches on that basting stitch. We're trimming through all the layers. Don't worry that your fabric only goes to here and you have all this battleizer left, because what was going to really happen is your seam is going to be stitched there. So we just need this part to fill in So we have batting inside of our sashing that's going to go in between the rows. Might not make any sense now, but when we actually do it, it will definitely make sense. And the same thing here, 1.5 inches from the basting stitch. And we do have a joining DVD that's really awesome that Linda did, and she did a great job on it. And so it might be something you may be interested in maybe taking a look at. There's it's not just our designs that we've used others to show different joining and sashing methods. So different quilt as you go methods, so it might be something you may be interested in. So here is the front of our block all trimmed. Here's the back of our block. You can see we use the Trimmer by George here. So the only thing showing is the fabric that is on the front of the block. And then the rest was through all the layers. So we had a 1.5 inches here, 1.5 inches here, and 1/2 inch here. And the reason that we're different is because this is the side that's going to have a border attached. This is going to have a special sashing method joined to it, and this side here will be joined to another block. So you'll get to learn all kinds of different joining and sashing methods, and so I think you'll really find it beneficial. So thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you again next time, and we appreciate you watching.